They called them the team of the 80s, armed with enough bravado and quality on and off the pitch. Crystal Palace were finally supposed to make themselves known to the wider footballing world. However, they failed. This is a story, the Malcolm Allison and Terry Venables days at Selhurst Park. Cast your mind back to when you were a wee boy. It's the 1850s and the Crystal Palace Exhibition Centre has moved from Hyde Park to South London. A generation later, an amateur team from the Crystal Palace pipeline participate in a competition that they were calling the FA Cup, but they quickly fade from view. It's only in 1905 when a formalised version of the club known as Crystal Palace is founded. Within a year they win the Southern League's second division, taking them feasibly to within 1 year of the Football League. However, Crystal Palace would be more of a football institution because of its hosting of the FA Cup finals. It wasn't for a lack of trying. They'd followed promotion by stunning one of the finer teams in the world and incumbent champions of England, Newcastle United, in the FA Cup in 1907, before building towards a Southern League silver medal in 1914. After the Great War, Crystal Palace moved to West Norwood and finally broke ground at Selhurst Park in 1924. 4 years prior, they had entered an expanded football league at the third tier, instantly gaining promotion to Division 2. Unfortunately, this first flirtation with the second division was brief, and after their 1925 relegation, Edmund Goodman stepped down as manager. Even with a prolific Peter Simpson who rattled in 165 goals in 195 games and the management of Drac Tresidern, it isn't enough for promotion in a tough format. 2 second places in 1929 and 1931 isn't enough to go up to Div 2. And when Tresidern was pulled across the capital in 1935 to Spurs, Palace's window slammed shut. Things would get worse before it got better, having to apply for re-election in 1949 and 1951 successfully. However, in Ronnie Ruck's one term as player-manager, his incredible scoring rate had given them the brief respite of 7th place in 1950. But he quickly left and Palace sunk back into the mire, having to reapply for re-election all over again in 1956, once again successfully. With the third tier becoming nationalised in 58, Crystal Palace needed to finish in the top half of the third division south, and yet finished 4 points off 12th place. Palace therefore were to play in the 4th tier. George Smith was in as manager, but he couldn't take them back up, so Arthur Waite doesn't wait in replacing him with a certain Arthur Rowe, who had previously revolutionised Spurs. He had built the foundations to ensure that the 60s would be a little bit more entertaining at Selhurst Park than the 50s had been. As that Spurs team became the first English team of the 20th century to win the double, Rowe was delivering success south of the river, taking Palace to the third tier via second place in the 4th division. Johnny Byrne had netted 31 goals in the promotion year, and quickly he became sought after, picking up England caps, and after a mid-table finish in the 3rd division, he was away to West Ham in the summer of 62 for a British record fee of 65 grand. 1962 was also the year in which floodlights went up at Selhurst Park, an occasion marked by the visit of 5-time champions Real Madrid, a game only slenderly lost. Despite Arthur Rowe leaving midway through the 1962-63 campaign, Palace weren't done yet. Dick Graham led the club to the 2nd division for only the 2nd time in 1964. This time they were competitive, and under the management of Bert Head, Crystal Palace finally became relevant in the world of English football. The year was 1969 and Crystal Palace were promoted as runners-up to the top flight for the very first time. Steve Kember scored the winning goal against Fulham to confirm it. They go up alongside Brian Clough's Derby County. One of these teams would be champions of England within 3 years. Instead, Palace narrowly avoided relegation in their first campaign in the elite of the English game before turning to Chelsea and experienced forwards in Alan Birchenall and Bobby Tamblyn, acts that just about kept Palace's head above water. Those 9 lives though ran out in 1973. Head departed the hot seat, making way for a revolution. With Arthur Waite moving to a life presidency role, there was now room for another rambunctious figure at the top of the club.
We'll wonder if he's going to do it now, and he changes to the other. Are Arsenal going ahead? No! No! Yes! Yes, the goal has been given.
Palace were spiralling the drain, relegated come the end of the 72-73 season, but a new man had been placed in charge, set with a task of changing the club forever. Malcolm Allison was in, out was the nickname of the Glaziers, and the old crest. In came the Eagles, a new crest and the team colours we're familiar with today, and a desire to flap their wings straight back to the top flight of English football. Didn't quite go to plan though.
Sends Middlesbrough on their way again, and this must be a great chance past Jackson, and it's there by Hickton. Deere stays in the goal area. What on earth was the goalkeeper doing?
November the 10th, that's the day where Crystal Palace won their first league game back in the second division in what had been a pretty rough start to life after relegation. After slightly turning the nose up in the new year with wins over Notts County, Preston and Oxford, being followed by yet more victories against reigning cup holders Sunderland, as well as Bristol City, Nottingham Forest and Fulham, another scrappy 2 points was won at Swindon on the final midweek of the season. It left the newly anointed Eagles with half a chance of staying up. Ahead of a trip to Cardiff on the final day, Palace occupied the drop zone but knew that if they beat the team directly above them, they'd be safe from relegation. The game though was drawn 1-1 and Palace fell through the trapdoor right down into the third division. The hiring of the big personality in Malcolm Allison wasn't supposed to go this way, but now they had hit rock bottom. What was there left to do?
Or Taylor, it's Taylor curling it in, and on the far side, Cannon going in! Jim Cannon! Perhaps the fiercest shot of all, and I wouldn't mind betting he's going to have a go. No, Taylor, curling it, deflection, it's a crossbar, Chennington!
Key to the club was a seemingly innocuous and heftily embarrassing defeat at Hereford United in September. 2-0 the scoreline on the day, but it marked the entrance of Terry Venables into the club. Whilst Palace would hardly pull up any trees, falling wildly short of promotion in what was their first season back in the third tier, Venables would earn a spot on the coaching staff ahead of the more promising 1975-76 season.
Chance here for Swindlehurst, and he must score. Well, if he does try to escape, it could be very painful for him.
No, you're right, they didn't go up. In fact, they were stuck in the same 5th place, winning the same 18 games from 46, except now with 2 more points than the prior season and 1 point closer to promotion, of which Hereford, Cardiff and Millwall could boast. But it wasn't all that, because Selhurst Park had long been gripped by another form of the game. Yes, despite Crystal Palace being synonymous with the FA Cup thanks to its hosting of the finals in the early days of the competition, they had never really done much of anything in the competition. In the 1975-76 season though, that was all about to change.
The Palace, but no clever tactics this time, just straight to Peter Taylor. Evans underneath it, Swindlehurst, and it's there!
Peter Taylor's clipped. It had to happen sooner or later.
But Taylor goes alone and goes well. Oh, hit the bar! Chatterton's there.
And he needs to. He's going past Moncur as well. There's the cross coming in. Whittle a goal! Alan Whittle!
The run began all the way back in the first round of November in the might of Walton and Hersham, a team that had been renowned for eliminating Football League teams such as Brighton and Hove Albion a year or two prior. Instead of being subjected to that embarrassment, Palace squeaked beyond them and then saw off rivals Millwall after a replay to gain access to the elite of the third round, where they were paired with Scarborough, hardly the best tourist destination on the third day of 1976, but Palace did just about enough to get by before being handed the glamour tie, Leeds United. No, it wasn't Don Revie's Leeds, and yes, their days at the top were definitely numbered, but they were still a scalp to be taken, and that's exactly what Dave Swindlehurst inspired with a 4th round winner. Being officially the business end of the competition, Palace's test did not relent with a 5th round visit to Stamford Bridge on Valentine's Day. Roaring into a 2-goal lead at half-time, Chelsea had Palace pegged back late on in the game. Instead of being rattled by the shift in momentum though, Peter Taylor added a second and Palace's winner late on. Quarter-final time meant another former champion, but one a little kinder in Sunderland. The Rokerites were more attuned to cup success, but they were also itching to get back into the top flight. Whilst they achieved that goal, Palace had their number in the cup, Alan Whittle with the winner this time. So it was to Stamford Bridge again in this circuitous cup run and to meet Southampton in the semi-final. Whilst champions Derby County and newly promoted Manchester United met in the other tie, this was a meeting of lower league teams. Southampton very much the 76 equivalent of Sunderland in what they were, second tier and aiming for the cup. Alternatively, Palace was striving to become the first club outside the top 2 levels of English football in 72 years to reach an FA Cup final. The preparation in typical Malcolm Allison fashion, a champagne bar which I'm contractually obliged to describe as swanky.
Oscar. Gilchrist. Hit well. Goal! This really is the moment where he could settle everything now for Southampton. Peach versus Hammond. 2-0.
And with a loss to Southampton, that was effectively the end of the road, for now, of Malcolm Allison at Selhurst Park. The club squelched to just one win from their final 8 league fixtures, losing at Chester and Sheffield Wednesday whilst succumbing to home draws against rabble like Halifax Town, Chesterfield and Aldershot. Come the new season though, there was a new face in the Selhurst Park dugout.
With a long throw in, Ian Evans worries the defence and Swindlehurst was ready.
Terry Venables was a new manager, only recently a former player of the club, and being equipped with lower league experience via Queen's Park Rangers too, he was viewed as trustworthy because of that experience mixed in with his higher level quality with Chelsea and Spurs. He had acquired Rashid Harkouk, signed for a paltry £1,500. This was the new Palace at its heart, youth policy mixed with bargain basement buys, and by now they were calling them the team of the 80s, as coined by Jimmy Greaves. There could be no finer example of youth product than Jim Cannon, who made his debut in 1973 and wouldn't leave until 88, setting the appearance record at 660 games. Then you had Vince Hilaire making his debut right out of the youth team in March 77. Kenny Sampson now had a couple of senior years under his belt too, after making the same graduation. Whilst they weren't a team to go on a mammoth winning streak, they were incredibly hard to beat. Take pre-Christmas as an example, a time where Palace won 0 league games but also lost 1 from 6. That type of nous kept them in the hunt for one of the 3 promotion spots. These inconsistencies only really tailed off with the 3-0 pumping that they received up at Sixfields on March 15th. Even then, with 14 wins and 10 draws from 33 games, Palace remained only 6 points behind the promotion places and Rotherham, whilst the top 2 weren't pulling away either. Soon Venables' side would draw closer to them, unbeaten throughout the remainder of March and for almost the entirety of April, before suffering a heavy defeat at Port Vale. It looked as though they had left it a little too late, 5 points to deficit with 4 to play. However, they had still yet to play Wrexham. Should they beat them twice, it would leave the Welsh side with a nervy final day against fellow promotion contenders Mansfield Town. And that's exactly what Palace did, scraping the 2 points at home to the Welsh side before slamming 4 past them at the racecourse ground 8 days later. Palace had finished their season, but they had yet to receive confirmation of their promotion. With a win over the already promoted Mansfield though, Wrexham would leapfrog the Eagles. Instead, they lost. The Eagles soared into the second tier alongside Mansfield and newfound rivals Brighton and Hove Albion.
Signal there from Challadon. And a goal by Ian Evans. It's an old trick.
Harkouk then with the corner. Looking it for Chatterton, who leaves it for Swindlehurst, and it took a deflection, but Swindlehurst...
Come Christmas, it wasn't out of the question that Palace would only be paying a flying visit to the second tier. After holding Spurs at White Hart Lane, they occupied a position close enough to the top 3 to be considered outside contenders. The scalps of Sheffield United, Bolton Wanderers and Stoke City from the earlier weeks of the season, however, would come unstuck, and just 5 wins after the new year meant that Palace would finish 9th, 15 points off the promoted Spurs. Still, it was a good foundation set, only one bolstered by the acquisition of John Burridge from Aston Villa for the number 1 jersey. They would need all of that experience and more should they complete an assault on the second tier title.
Come now for Swindlehurst. And it's number 2 by David Swindlehurst.
And catch him with the trousers down.
Stoke, of course, have always...
Even though they would face mild distractions from cup fixtures such as a second replay in the 3rd round of the League Cup against Aston Villa at Highfield Road and a home defeat in the 5th round of the FA Cup, the 1978-79 campaign was still a promotion push. This thanks to the goals of Dave Swindlehurst, who was firmly in his pomp by now. Palace wouldn't be beaten in the league until a Halloween double defeat against Fulham and Burnley. They would barely equal that amount of defeats for the remainder of the season. The only thing seemingly stopping the Eagles soaring into the top flight of English football for the first time in 6 years was their propensity for a draw. Again though, it was that resilience of not being able to lose that kept Palace in the hunt. Come Christmas Day, they were top of the table, 4 points ahead of 4th place Brighton at the midway point point of the season. They'd won 10 and drawn 9, a ratio that would be maintained throughout the rest of the season. That would be slanted though in the first few weeks of the year, as Palace didn't find their first win of 1979 until Wrexham visited on March the 3rd. Naturally, Palace drew 5 times, 3 of which were goalless. So much for the swashbuckling football many think that Terry Venables' teams possess. It was a necessary football though, and outside of a losing trip to Newcastle on April the 7th, Palace wouldn't be beaten again, digging in when it really mattered come the final straight. Before the trip to Bristol on April 14th, Palace were outside the top 3, 18 draws and 14 wins. Just 1 drop point from the next 4 games though took Palace to the brink of the big time once again. Above them, Brighton, Stoke and Sunderland had all finished their campaigns. Meanwhile, Palace just needed a point to jump above Sunderland and into the top flight. Even more deliciously, a win at home to Burnley would take them top ahead of Brighton. 51,000 crammed into Selhurst Park in anticipation.
Then from the wing, Vince Hilaire found the head of Ian Walsh, and Selhurst Park sensed a real victory. Part as Dave Swindlehurst, Palace's top scorer, added 1 more to his tally.
Palace were up as champions. Their 4 defeats in the second division had only been bettered by 1 team, a certain Leeds United governed by Don Revie, since only 2 teams have matched that at least before parachute payments bastardised the competition. Given that our only case study right here in 1979 was Don Revie's Leeds becoming one of the better teams in world football, there was even more weight added to the team of the 80s moniker.
Now without a win. But that's a goal by Walsh. That's a good run. That's a good pass to Walsh. A chance for him here. He delayed for a moment and he's gone in.
13th place tells a story of a team that had held its own in a new division that could boast 2 recent European champions in Nottingham Forest and Liverpool, as well as incoming champions on the continent in Aston Villa and Ipswich Town, and that's before we even get to the big fish like Man United, Leeds, Spurs, Man City and Everton. This a team that weren't beaten in the league until October the 9th and were only a point away from the top of English football before their invincibility streak was stripped away. Nonetheless, the Eagles continued at an alarming pace until their wings were clipped around Christmas time, first with a string of defeats at difficult places like Anfield and Elland Road, as well as at Brighton. Then by the sale of Dave Swindlehurst to Derby for 400,000 smackers in February, the goals dried up and the wins soon did. After his sale, Palace only won 3 games, eventually petering out into that mid-table spot. It should be noted though that this was Palace's best league finish yet. Now was the time to strike whilst the iron was hot.
And Hilaire is spending a lot of his time covering.
Minutes, he'd seemingly put the match beyond Palace's reach. A nice layoff from Steve Archibald and Crooks' 3rd goal in only...
Gone was the solidity that got Palace to the position they enjoyed the fruits of in the prior season. From the 4-3 loss against Spurs to a 5-2 win at home to Borough, little did we know it, but Terry Venables had just experienced his final victory as Crystal Palace manager, for now. It was this bad start, 2 points from 10 fixtures, which had the Eagles shot down into rock bottom and had Venables scurrying across the capital, exchanging the Palace for the Queen's Park Rangers. A series of bad deals had left the club in a bad position both on and off the field. Across 3 signings of Clive Allen, Jerry Francis and Mike Flanagan, Palace had spent more across 2 summers than they had done in their entire history. Then you factor in Kenny Sansom being sold as part of the deal that brought Clive Allen from Highbury to Selhurst, and the fact that those 3 signings equated to just 140 league appearances for Palace, and the whole thing had been an utter disaster. After nearly 2 months of Ernie Whalley in caretaker charge, Palace had gone from 1 win in 10 and bottom of the league to 4 wins in 20 and only goal difference keeping them from the foot of the division. They needed a saviour.
I think people, when they look at you now, they say, I'm afraid Malcolm may have blown it as a manager. Do you think there is a possibility of that?
2 days after that interview, Malcolm Allison was back and back at Selhurst Park. He gave himself 6 weeks to turn around the failing ship. So let's tally up those scores. A loss at Nottingham Forest, fair enough, they're the reigning champions of Europe. A 4-1 thrashing of Norwich City, now we're talking. 4 Shipton defeat at Southampton, a draw at home but a creditable one versus Arsenal. A loss down at Brighton, out of the cup at former side Man City. Home draws against Stoke and Wolves before finally a loss at Borough. By now Ron Nodes had bought the club armed with a plan to re-energise them financially. By the end of the week, Malcolm Allison was gone once again.
Smiley. It's a bit short. And here's Isto. And he makes it pay.
Dario Grady was in and he groomed Palace to just one win to end the season. They were officially back down. So Crystal Palace, they were famously called the team of the 80s, so let's do a quick recce on how the 80s went down at Selhurst Park. 4 mid-table finishes once they were back in Division 2 and 3 failed attempts at promotion back to the big time thereafter, without much joy in the cup competitions. Former player Steve Kember returned and failed, lasting under a year. Then of all people, Alan Mullery was hired, but he also failed despite being handed 2 seasons at the club. Then the ultimate dice roll was made.
Think what kind of a manager am I going to be? I'm going to be a Tommy Docherty or a Dave Sexton. I think at the end of the day, you've just got to be yourself.
This is the first of a 2-parter on Crystal Palace. Click on the second part here, if you're from the future, that is.